Paul Hogan was born on October 8, 1939, in Lightning Ridge, New South Wales, a tiny outback town known for its opal mining and unforgiving landscape. His arrival into the world came at a time when Australia, much like the rest of the globe, was still reeling from the hardships of the Great Depression and would soon be caught in the upheaval of World War II. Life in Lightning Ridge was not glamorous. There were no grand theaters, no glittering lights, no reminders of the entertainment industry he would later dominate. Instead, Hogan's childhood was marked by dust, hard work, and a rugged sense of survival that came from living in a place where the land itself demanded resilience. Very little is recorded about his parents or the details of his early family life, yet those modest beginnings deeply influenced his character. Growing up far from the polish of big cities, he developed a grounded personality, sharp wit, and dry humor that reflected the no-nonsense environment around him. These qualities, born in obscurity, would later become his trademarks and set him apart in a world filled with polished, manufactured entertainers. As a boy, Hogan wasn't raised with dreams of fame or the arts. He belonged to a working-class culture where survival and contribution mattered more than ambition. From a young age, he understood that hard labor wasn't just expected, it was essential. His education didn't push him toward the stage or spotlight, and he never followed a conventional trajectory that other entertainers took. Instead, his path was carved through the everyday grind of ordinary Australian life. Hogan's humor, even in childhood, had an earthy quality, cheeky, observant, and often self-deprecating. It wasn't the type of comedy you'd find in books or on screen, but the kind that came from listening to people around him and finding laughter in life's simplest and harshest moments. In his 20s, Hogan moved to Sydney and took on one of the city's most demanding jobs, working as a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. This job was the very definition of danger, requiring workers to climb high into the steel framework above the bustling harbor and carry out maintenance and repairs. It was a world of dizzying heights, constant risks, and heavy manual labor. For Hogan, it was not only a source of income, but also a crucible of character. Facing danger daily demanded courage and a steady temperament. In this environment, jokes weren't just entertainment. They were survival, a way to keep spirits high while balancing on beams hundreds of feet above the ground. Surrounded by tough, resilient men, Hogan's sense of humor sharpened into something quick, biting, and instantly relatable. He learned how to laugh in the face of danger, and that very ability would later become central to the comedic style audiences fell in love with. Standing high above the glittering waters of Sydney Harbour, Hogan was far from the glitz of show business. Yet the work and the men he worked alongside gave him something more valuable than formal training: stories, observations, and the kind of raw perspective that polished entertainers rarely captured. He saw life from the heights of the bridge and from the depths of working-class hardship. This duality, fearless yet relatable, tough yet humorous, was what set him apart when, years later, he stumbled unexpectedly into the entertainment spotlight. Paul Hogan's first brush with fame came not from a carefully crafted plan, but from a stroke of chance. In 1971, he appeared on the Australian television talent program New Faces. At the time, Hogan wasn't a professional comedian. He wasn't even trying to carve a career in entertainment. He was still working his demanding job as a rigger on the Harbour Bridge. But when he stepped in front of the cameras, everything changed. With nothing more than his natural wit, sharp tongue, and easygoing demeanor, Hogan delivered a performance that struck a chord with audiences and judges alike. His comedy wasn't polished in the traditional sense, but that was exactly why people loved it. His jokes were self-deprecating, his observations cheeky yet insightful, and above all, his humor was unmistakably Australian. Unlike the comedy dominating television at the time, much of which was imported from Britain or America, Hogan's style was raw and unfiltered. He sounded like the people sitting at home watching, not like someone trying to impress an elite audience. His use of everyday expressions, his knack for poking fun at himself, and his irreverent take on life's absurdities gave viewers something they hadn't seen before. The contrast was refreshing. Australians weren't being asked to laugh at foreign references or polished punchlines. They were laughing at themselves, their culture, and the quirks of their own daily lives. Hogan had unwittingly tapped into a gap in the entertainment market, and the response was overwhelming. From that one appearance, Hogan realized he had stumbled upon something powerful. He hadn't rehearsed for years or honed his act in comedy clubs. Instead, he had drawn directly from the humor he'd developed on construction sites and in the outback. It was authentic and people knew it. The overwhelming popularity of his appearance opened doors quickly. Not long after, Hogan was invited back to television. And soon he was fronting his own show. The Paul Hogan show became a sensation across Australia in the 1970s and early 1980s. Hogan didn't just star in it, he wrote and produced much of the material himself, giving the show a distinctly personal flavor. It was a sketch comedy series filled with outlandish characters, absurd situations, and a satirical edge that poked fun at everything from suburban life to Aussie stereotypes. Hogan's ability to create and embody a range of characters highlighted his versatility. He could be the everyman, the fool, or the cheeky larrikin, all while making audiences laugh at themselves in the process. Audiences adored the show because it wasn't afraid to be bold, irreverent, and, at times, outrageous. Hogan's knack for laughing at himself endeared him to millions. He didn't place himself above the audience. He was part of the joke, and that humility made his humor all the more appealing. The show's success wasn't confined to Australia either. It crossed borders, finding fans in South Africa and other English-speaking countries, proving that Hogan's comedic sensibility had an international reach. The industry recognized his growing stardom, too. In 1973, Hogan won the prestigious TV Week Logie Award for Best New Talent, a clear acknowledgement that his comedic star was rising. For a man who had once been working high above the Sydney Harbour Bridge, this was a remarkable transformation. Hogan had gone from a rigor cracking jokes on scaffolds to a national icon bringing laughter into living rooms. Yet even with fame building, Hogan remained grounded, still carrying that earthy, working-class humor that had always defined him. As the 1970s moved into the 1980s, Hogan's profile only grew stronger. He had carved out a unique place for himself, not as a polished Hollywood type, but as an entertainer who made Australians proud of their own brand of humor. By this point, it was clear Paul Hogan was no passing novelty. He had established himself as a comedic force, one whose reach would soon extend far beyond television screens. By the early 1980s, Paul Hogan had already become a household name in Australia through his television success, but his ambitions were far from over. After years of comedy sketches and live performances, Hogan began to eye a transition into acting, though his entry into the world of film was modest. In 1980, he appeared briefly in Fatty Finn, a light-hearted Australian movie that gave him a small cameo role. While it wasn't a life-changing part, it offered Hogan his first taste of film and showed him the possibilities that lay beyond the television screen. Unlike comedy sketches, film demanded different pacing, a greater sense of storytelling, and the ability to inhabit a character for longer than a quick laugh. Hogan embraced the challenge, even if the role was fleeting. A few years later, in 1985, Hogan secured a more substantial role in the television miniseries Anzacs. Set during World War I, the series depicted the lives of Australian soldiers fighting overseas, and Hogan took on the role of Lance Corporal Pat Clary. This was a far cry from the cheeky sketches that had made him famous. It was serious drama, requiring him to shed his comedic instincts and play a role grounded in history and emotion. Audiences were surprised to see a different side of Hogan, but the performance worked. It proved he wasn't just a one-note comedian. He had range, and he could step into roles that demanded sincerity and depth. This small but significant step helped prepare Hogan for what would become the defining project of his career. That project arrived in 1986, when Paul Hogan co-wrote and starred in Crocodile Dundee. The film told the story of Michael J. Crocodile Dundee, a rugged bushman from the Australian outback who finds himself navigating the unfamiliar streets of New York City. The character was larger than life, full of charisma, humor, and charm, yet still deeply relatable. Hogan's portrayal drew heavily from his own personality and the cultural archetypes Australians held dear. He wasn't just playing Dundee, he was channeling the essence of the larrikin Aussie spirit that audiences around the world found irresistible. From the moment it was released, Crocodile Dundee became a cultural phenomenon. The film wasn't just a hit in Australia, it took the world by storm, particularly in the United States. Audiences were captivated by the mix of humor, adventure, and fish-out-of-water scenarios that made the story so entertaining. Hogan's cheeky grin, his casual confidence, and his iconic line, "That's not a knife. That's a knife," became instant pop culture staples. The movie grossed hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide, turning Hogan into an international superstar almost overnight. For an Australian entertainer who had once climbed the Sydney Harbour Bridge for a living, this level of fame was staggering. What set Crocodile Dundee apart wasn't just its humor, but its authenticity. Hogan had co-written the screenplay himself, ensuring that the story remained true to Australian culture while still appealing to a global audience. The character of Dundee wasn't just a stereotype. He was a fully realized figure who represented the ruggedness, humor, and resilience of the Australian spirit. Audiences in America, Europe, and beyond were introduced to a new side of Australia, one that was both exotic and endearing. Hogan had managed to bottle the charm of his homeland and share it with the entire world. The success of Crocodile Dundee catapulted Hogan into a level of fame few Australian entertainers had ever achieved. Suddenly, he was walking red carpets in Hollywood, appearing on American talk shows, and receiving offers from studios eager to work with him. The film even earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay, a testament to Hogan's talent, not just as an actor, but as a storyteller. In one fell swoop, Hogan had gone from a local television comedian to a global icon, and his rugged bushman character had cemented itself as one of cinema's most memorable creations. The runaway success of Crocodile Dundee not only changed Paul Hogan's career, but also his personal life. On the set of the film, he met Linda Kozlowski, the American actress who played Sue Charlton, Dundee's romantic counterpart. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, and it quickly blossomed into something real off-screen. At the time, Hogan was married to his first wife, Noeline Edwards, with whom he had 5 children. The romance between Hogan and Kozlowski soon became the subject of tabloid headlines around the world. Their relationship, though controversial at first, grew stronger as they continued to work together on sequels and navigate the whirlwind of international fame. In 1990, Hogan and Edwards divorced after more than 2 decades together, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Just a short time later, Hogan married Linda Kozlowski, and the pair settled into a new life together. To outsiders, it looked like a fairy tale. They were the glamorous couple who had brought one of cinema's most beloved romantic pairings into reality. For a while, the story held true. They welcomed a son, Chance, and Hogan seemed to have found a balance between his professional success and personal happiness. But the truth was more complicated. Hollywood fame had its perks, but it also came with immense pressures. After the original Crocodile Dundee, Hogan struggled to replicate the same level of success. Sequels followed, Crocodile Dundee 2 in 1988 and Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles in 2001, but none captured the magic of the original. Critics were often harsh, and while audiences still adored Hogan's charm, the later films felt more like echoes of past glory than groundbreaking hits. For an actor who had skyrocketed to international stardom, the gradual decline was difficult to manage. Outside of acting, Hogan remained in the public eye through endorsements and appearances, but the consistency of his career never matched that singular peak of 1986. Personal challenges began to weigh heavily, particularly as his marriage to Kozlowski started to unravel. Despite years together, cultural differences, lifestyle changes, and the strains of public scrutiny began to erode their bond. In 2014, the couple finalized their divorce. Unlike the lighthearted roles Hogan had played on screen, the split was painful and left lasting scars. Linda Kozlowski later admitted that she had grown weary of Hogan's laid-back lifestyle and his reluctance to move beyond the character of Dundee. She wanted more adventure, more growth, and a life that didn't revolve around the shadow of a single film. Hogan, for his part, struggled to let go of the persona that had made him famous, as if Dundee had become not just his character, but his identity. The divorce was not marked by scandal or explosive headlines, but rather by a quiet sadness, the end of a partnership that had once symbolized both professional and personal triumph. In the years that followed, Hogan largely withdrew from Hollywood. He continued to live in Australia and later in Los Angeles, maintaining close ties with his children and focusing on family rather than fame. Though his later projects never reached the heights of Crocodile Dundee, Hogan remained a beloved figure in Australia, admired for his humor, his charm, and the way he had put Australian culture on the world stage. Even as time passed and the spotlight dimmed, fans remembered him not just as Paul Hogan, but as the man who embodied the cheeky, rugged, irrepressible spirit of the Outback. Looking back, Hogan's life was never about a polished rise to stardom. It was about chance, grit, humor, and authenticity. From the heights of the Sydney Harbor Bridge to the heights of Hollywood, his journey was proof that sometimes the most unlikely paths lead to the greatest stories. The hardships, failed marriages, critical setbacks, and fading fame only made the triumphs shine brighter. For Paul Hogan, the boy from Lightning Ridge who became Crocodile Dundee, the legacy is clear. He captured the essence of Australia and made the whole world smile.